This is Just Right. Sweet Haven Farm, Sweet Small Town Romance, Book 3. Written by Jessie Gussman. Performed by J. Dice. Episode 8. Chapter 11. Gator tried to meet Avery's gaze, but she wouldn't look at him. The comment about his shirt had probably just slipped out and had obviously embarrassed her. She didn't need to know how it completely shifted his world. He'd had such a good time with Avery, but it was this attraction that he couldn't shake that had him bothered. His heart and body had jumped on the idea that she might feel it too. From the way she was looking at anything besides him, apparently not. Gator's dogs were stretched out under his mother's chair. "I think I have time before they announce the winners to take her home and get her settled there." "I'll help you." Avery turned and started toward his mother's chair. "You haven't seen the whole celebration. I know you haven't had time to walk around today. Go, see some things." "I'll help you with your mom first," Avery insisted. "Unless you want to do it all yourself?" It would be easier with help. He could feed the dogs while she took care of getting his mom in the house and ready for home nursing to come. "People come from all over to see this festival. It's a big deal." She shook his mother awake gently. "I think I saw the most important things," she said. Then her attention focused on helping his mom sit up. "If you come with me, I'll walk you around when we get back." He could tell himself he offered because he felt he owed her for helping, but he knew that wasn't it. "Deal." While Avery took care of his mom, Gator loaded the dogs and brought his pickup as close to the tree area as possible. It helped that the security guard knew him and let him pull through one closed street, so his mom only had to walk half of a block. Gator carried the chair in one hand. His other hand went around his mother's back, overlapping Avery's slender arm. He'd never had this much fun at the festival. Usually, he'd done the lumberjack competition and left. They didn't talk much on the way home. He helped Avery get his mom in the door. By the time he fed his dogs and bedded them down for the night, she had his mom changed and on the couch. "I have a treatment tomorrow in Pittsburgh." Her voice sounded scratchy, maybe from the cold air. Avery propped pillows behind her as she spoke. "Gator is taking you to it?" "Yes." Gator stopped in the doorway, unnoticed, as his mother grabbed Avery's wrist. "Did you ask him about what I said earlier?" Avery patted his mother's hand and shook her head. Gator almost interrupted them to ask what she had said earlier, but he held himself still. "If he brings it up, I'll say something, but it's not something that interests him." "Honey, you interest him." An automatic denial sprang to his lips, but he swallowed it and stood still. His mother was right. Avery did interest him. She attracted him. She amused him. She pulled him out of his little bubble and helped him see the world with new eyes. Maybe that was why opposites attracted. His mother reached a hand up and patted Avery's cheek. "You do." "I don't know about that, but he's quite interesting too." Gator's chest expanded. He'd take interesting. "He needs a good woman in his life." "You're not going anywhere, so no hinting about that." Gator was surprised that she felt comfortable enough with his mother to be so blunt. His mother wasn't a beat-around-the-bush type of lady, and Avery had her figured out. "Oh, I wasn't hinting anything of the kind. Plus,
I wasn't suggesting you take my place as his mother.
Avery tucked her feet in.
Yeah, he's a little big to be sitting on my lap.
Mine too, his mother said with a wry grin.
He's a good man.
Mom, I'm standing right here. Would you please stop?
Didn't hear you, son.
That would be the first time in my life you didn't hear me walk in the house without taking my boots off. His mother closed her eyes and raised her brows. A look he was familiar with from childhood. That does not make you look innocent.
I actually thought it did,
Avery said. After you've been around her for a while, it doesn't fool you anymore.
Hey, people, I'm right here.
His mother waved a hand without opening her eyes. Before he could say anything, there was a knock at the door. He let the home nurse in, and after chatting for a few minutes, Avery and he left. All the close spots were taken when they got back to the town square, and he ended up parking along the road about half a mile away. I hope you don't mind walking a while, he said as he reached for the door handle.
I don't think we have a choice. I would have guessed that things would have thinned out by now.
Avery got out. He met her at the front of the truck and they started walking. Maybe at other places, Christmas festivals die down after dark, but here, the bonfire's the most popular activity. I haven't heard anything this year, but in years past, they often have fireworks too.
I love fireworks,
Avery said.
But I just can't believe people are out in this cold.
Since the sun went down, the temperature must have dropped 20 degrees. She folded her arms over her chest and shivered. Gator didn't question his instinct. He slid his arm around her shoulders and pulled her to him. She tucked very nicely right under his arm. It was a new feeling, and he liked it. I don't think you ever warmed up from being on that plank.
You got wet and I didn't, but I think you're right. I'll welcome hot chocolate.
He relaxed. She was actually going to allow him to walk with his arm around her. And not only that, but she nestled in closer. It was a good feeling. Her sweet and sassy scent drifted to his nose and he pulled her in tighter. I'll have to make sure you get some.
You don't owe me anything.
Her hip brushed his thigh. Feeling that sweet caress for the rest of their walk might be the definition of torture, but he didn't move away. Although he did try to focus his mind. He couldn't deny the heat that raced through his body, but Avery was a beautiful person on the inside, and he enjoyed talking to her. I do owe you. I've been meaning to thank you for what you've been doing for my mom.
You don't have to thank me. I believe she's a friend. I know she's older than me, but I've never chosen my friends based on their age. It's more about how connected I feel. I just really feel at ease around her. I like her, and I enjoy helping her.
I'll still get you hot chocolate. She chuckled.
I guess I'll let you.
He took a deep breath, not entirely sure he was not making a huge mistake, but he couldn't get her words from earlier about his shirt out of his mind. What are you doing next Friday?
I have that audition I told you about in Washington, D.C.
He'd forgotten. There's supposed to be a snowstorm next week.
The weather never does what it's supposed to do. If the weather people say it's going to snow, I'm placing bets on it being 75 and sunny.
You're one of those people who wouldn't evacuate for a hurricane. I wouldn't have guessed it by looking at you. Her shoulders drooped a little.
I suppose I am kind of stubborn.
Kind of.
A little?
The barn is still standing, Avery, and that is solely because of you and your determination to keep it up. even though there are 100 other places more suitable for a Christmas party around here."
She took a breath like she was going to say something, but she exhaled and stayed silent.
They passed the first streetlight. A few clusters of people, mostly teens, laughed and talked as they walked by. "All the booths will be closed except for the ones in the square, probably."
"I would have loved to see the crafts."
"Maybe next year you can have your own booth."
"I'm not very good at making stuff. I'm better at decorating."
"I see." He was good at making stuff. It was an example of how their differences complemented each other. Maybe when he looked at Kristen and saw all their similarities, he hadn't realized how being the same might get boring. Or worse, how it fostered competition between them. Mostly on her end, though, to be honest. He wasn't a real competitive guy, but she hated it when he won or was right. "Are you getting warmer?" he asked. Not because he wanted to let her go, but more because he didn't want her sweating to death beside him. He also figured it would give her the opportunity to get rid of his arm without having to say she didn't want it.
"I am."
His heart fell a little.
"I must have left my gloves at your house, though."
She held up her bare hand. He looked at it, then at her face. Her mouth curved in a small smile. Her eyes held a question. Without breaking their gaze, he slid his hand up her wrist. Their palms brushed against each other with a sizzle before his fingers slipped between hers. They stood like that for a moment, hands pressed against each other, eyes meeting. Gator's heart pumped hard and heavy in his chest. Little fogs of breath puffed out of Avery's mouth and swirled between them. Her eyes darkened and her lips trembled. Gator brought his other hand up and slid it along her cheek, touching the corner of her mouth with his thumb. The snow began falling more earnestly. From somewhere far away, bells chimed and Christmas music floated on the air. "I'll keep it warm," he said, surprised that he had a voice at all, even if it was low and gravelly and sounded like he'd just woken up. She bent her fingers over his hand and looked at their entwined digits.
"I trust you to do that."
She said it slowly, with wonder in her voice. He got the feeling trust wasn't something easy for her to say or admit. "What happened that trust is so hard for you?" She looked away and their hands dropped between. Gator kicked himself for breaking the spell that had them cocooned in their own world. He should have known that anything that had destroyed her trust in people would be a sore subject. It's just that he wanted to know everything about her. He wanted to protect her from those hurts. He closed his eyes against all the impossible things he wanted. He didn't know everything, but he'd learned in the last 10 years that life wasn't about getting what he wanted. "That bad?" he prompted when she still didn't answer. He tugged on her hand. Maybe it would be easier for her to tell him if they were walking. She fell in easily beside him, as she always did. He enjoyed it.
"No,"
she said slowly.
"It's not that I've been treated so horribly, I guess, but—"
Her hand tightened in his.
"My dad left my mom for another woman. My fiancé left me for someone else."
She threw up her other hand.
"The woman was a flutist. Seriously, a flutist."
She laughed and he joined in. "Right. Note to self, don't date flutists."
"Seriously, I've seen it over and over, and I've experienced it twice. Men don't stick around. Most men."
She bumped his arm with her shoulder.
I already know you're not staying.
I didn't leave Kristen. He felt like he needed to defend himself.
I know,
she said softly. But he couldn't suspend reality. I do have a job in Montana that I have to go back to eventually.
I know.
Have you ever thought about living anywhere but here in the East? He asked casually.
I have a job offer in Washington, D.C.
But you haven't accepted it yet?
I'm going to.
I see. He leaned his head back and watched the flakes of snow swirl down. What was he doing? Following up on an attraction he'd never felt before, which felt too strong to ignore, and chasing a woman who planned to live a continent away from him. He looked back down. The top of her red beanie hat was white with snow. Well, we can have a good time tonight, can't we?
I'm planning on it.
Great. Let me get you that hot chocolate. They dove into the outskirts of the milling crowd, many of whom carried plates loaded with hot dogs and roasted marshmallows, Christmas cookies, and gingerbread men. At the perimeter of the fire, folks roasted their food over the open flames. Long lines curled like tree ribbons at all three hot chocolate vendors. Gator noticed a few raised eyebrows when they saw the woman at his side and their entwined hands. There were a few smiles, but more dropped jaws, which made him grin. He wasn't the only person in the world who thought Avery and he were complete opposites. They walked by the long line of tables laden with the entries of the gingerbread house competition and several areas where children had made decorations and iced cookies.
I'd like to check out the farm booth, if you don't mind,
Avery said. He adjusted his steps and headed toward where Jillian stood behind the counter of a booth in the center of everything.
I have flyers there for the Christmas party, and I should make sure she doesn't need anything.
That's fine. I'll get us a couple cups of hot chocolate and come back around. Her hand slipped out of his. He let go reluctantly and watched her walk away with a bemused smile on his face. A tiny little powerhouse full of kindness and creativity. Avery had surprised him in a lot of different ways since he first saw her at the top of the light pole. He turned and headed toward the hot chocolate vendor with the shortest line. If he was only getting tonight with her, he was going to make it count as much as possible. He got a drink for Jillian, too, and had just paid when McCoy Rodning walked up. "Gator, where you been? You missed the announcement of the tree trimming winners." Gator couldn't believe he'd forgotten about that. "I took my mom home. Getting out like this wore her out." "Oh, yeah, I heard about her cancer. How's she doing?" McCoy took one of the cups of chocolate and walked alongside of Gator. "Good. Tired. It's hard, but she's got a great sense of humor, and she's always been happy." "Yeah, she's the type of person it's hard to keep down." Gator nodded. His mother had always been a positive, happy person. He'd been blessed to have her. It was easy to see that now. "So, Gator, we've known each other a long time," McCoy started. Gator immediately tensed. "Yeah?" "Your ex beat you in the lumberjack competition." Gator snorted and relaxed. "Yeah." McCoy waved the cup as he searched for words. "And you're not upset about that?" "Not really." "Okay, that would be one thing. You came in third, by the way. I beat the ex for you. You can throw cash later. Anyway," he continued with a grin, "you didn't win the lumberjack competition, which you always win, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you won the tree decorating contest?" He said tree decorating contest the way he might have said pig guts eating contest. Gator couldn't keep the triumphant smile off his face. We won? That's great. McCoy looked at him with one raised brow. Did she mess you up that bad? Avery? No way, man. I meant Kristen. Who's Avery? McCoy stopped walking and faced Gator. Kristen didn't mess me up. Not really. She left you, dude. Gator pressed his lips together and stared at his friend. Seriously? Sorry, I didn't mean to rub it in, but come on. You and Kristen were perfect. I mean, she was into everything you were, man. And now you lose the lumberjack for the first time in your life, and you win some decorating contest? And no offense, but the people around town are saying that little blonde chick you have on your arm isn't altogether there, if you know what I mean. McCoy pointed to his head and made circle motions. Gator's forehead thumped and his fingers tightened on the hot chocolate cup. He loosened his fingers deliberately. Since when does nice equal crazy? I don't know about nice, but she hangs out with that circus performer. People have seen them doing really weird stuff, like swallowing swords, hanging from their hair, and walking ridgelines. She has some kind of massive instrument that she plays incessantly, and she never goes anywhere without a cat strapped to her like a baby. Gator reminded himself that all those things were probably true. You've actually missed a few things. He'd seen her climb a light pole, and what kind of crazy person hung out with an old lady who had cancer? For fun. And decorated the woman's house and yard. So you know what I mean, and she's always wearing weird clothes. Gator. Kristen pushed between them. Congratulations, McCoy. You two must be talking about that blonde you've been hanging out with, Gator. It's the weird clothes comment that gave it away. Her name's Avery. He wanted to add an insult about Kristen's clothing choices, but his mother had always told him to take the high road. Plus, as much as he'd like to defend Avery, he didn't think it would make her happy to have him insulting people for her. Kristen ignored him. McCoy, did Gator tell you about the huge game preserve that I bought out in Oregon? He's coming out to run it and lead hunting parties for me. Gator opened his mouth to argue, but a gasp made him look to his left. Avery stood about 3 feet away. She'd stopped in mid-stride and her hand was over her mouth, the other on her stomach. Gator's stomach sank like a lead ball in a bucket of water. Chapter 12. Avery didn't really believe that Gator cared about her choice of clothes, and the first time he'd seen her, she'd been up that light pole. He acted like he liked Miss Prissypants, too. So even though she and Jillian could hear the whole thing from where they stood at the farm's booth just feet away, she hadn't really been bothered much. However, for some reason, the announcement that Gator was going to work for Kristen, well, it was more that Gator hadn't told her that he was going to work for Kristen. He'd just described his job out west and said that he was going back to it, and had also mentioned that Kristen had offered him a job. But he hadn't answered her when she asked if he was going to take it. Guess she knew the answer now. Avery. Gator's cheeks flushed a guilty red around his natural dark skin and tan. Why, Avery, we didn't see you standing there. Kristen pulled her lips in, like she was trying to contain a smirk. I assumed that was my hot chocolate. It's getting cold. Avery held out her hand with a smile that she hoped said there were no hard feelings. None at all. Since she and Gator were not a couple or in a relationship, there couldn't be. She had no rights. Yeah. Gator gave a little cough. This is McCoy Rodning. He won the lumberjack competition.
Nice to meet you.
Avery held her hand out, wishing she'd put gloves on instead of being stupid and thinking that Gator might hold her hand again. He shook her hand. Here, McCoy said to Gator. This is yours.
Thanks. Avery held her hand out. It's actually Jillian's. Don't let me interrupt you. Jillian can use help at the stand.
We were done. Gator dipped his head at the other two in a farewell and moved to Avery's side with his back to them.
Jillian can use the help, really. The spiced hot apple cider is selling better than hot chocolate right now.
She wasn't trying to avoid being with him, exactly, but it sure seemed like she'd been duped, or at least misled. He took her shoulders and bent until she met his gaze. I'm not working for Kristen. I'm not doing anything with Kristen.
She lied?
Avery hated the weakness in her that believed him. Had she learned nothing from the other men in her life? Plus, he was entitled to work with whomever he wanted, wherever he wanted. It's not the first time. His face pinched, and compassion welled inside her. He'd been hurt, too. It wasn't just about her.
Thanks for the hot chocolate.
She tilted her head, wondering if he'd accept her words as a peace offering. His dimple appeared. I can help with the stand.
I'm sure Jillian won't turn us down. Maybe she can take a break.
His finger touched her cheek, slowly sliding down. Send her home or wherever. We can handle it until closing. I don't think she's had a break all day.
I think you're right.
By 8 o'clock, the farm booth was sold out of everything except a few odds and ends decorations. Gator took the cash box to his pickup. Avery watched him walk away, her hands still on the plastic table covering she was folding. He'd surprised her so much today. From taking her place on the dunking booth to being a great help trimming the tree to working the booth with her tonight. Was he hoping to get something? Or was he just being nice? Or, and this thought made her heart go from adagio to allegro, did he actually like her? She finished folding the orange table cover and reached for the other one. What did it matter if he did? Sure, she was attracted to him, but after today, she liked and respected him too. But even if he wasn't working for Kristen, he was still headed west, while she was going to D.C. Unless she didn't get the place in the orchestra. If that happened, she still had a teaching job offer, but she could stay on the farm. Except she'd already decided that she wasn't going to impose on Ellie and Fink any longer. After the Christmas rush, things would slow down for them, and they deserved to take a break and have family time. They had spent so much time away with Kent's broken leg and surgery that they were probably looking forward to having their lives and their house back. Her heart whispered it wouldn't hurt to enjoy an evening or even a week with a kind, respectful man that she was attracted to. Her brain shouted that even considering the idea was the height of stupidity.
Hey, Avery, you gotten too attached to that covering to pack it up or what?
Jillian strolled up to the other side of the table. Avery startled.
Whoa, I was way out there. Yeah, I noticed.
Jillian took the covering from her and began folding it.
And before you panic, I'm just warning you that some kind of scruffy dog started following me around. It's kind of shy, and everyone I've asked has said it's a stray that the dog catcher's been trying to round up and take to the pound for weeks. Oh, that's sad.
She might be terrified of dogs, but she didn't want to see them put in cages and killed either.
Yeah. So anyway, I've been leaving pieces of hot dog out for it, and gonna see what I can do for it. I didn't want you going crazy when you saw it. Thanks. I've been working on my dog fear anyway.
Avery met Jillian's emerald eyes. Jillian had been a true friend to her since they'd both come to the farm this past summer. Maybe the first true friend she'd ever had.
Really? I didn't know. Where? Whose?
Avery laughed as she laid the table on its side to put the legs down.
Gator has dogs. The elderly dogs that you insisted wanted to eat you? Did I sound that dumb?
Jillian bit her lips and raised her brows. Avery slapped a leg down against the underside of the table.
I think that's a yes. I'm kidding. Getting bitten as a child would cause anyone to be afraid of dogs. Well, you were right. Gator's dogs are nice. Although I don't think I'd want to be around them if he weren't there.
Shh. Jillian froze. Avery did too, looking around without moving her head. Gesturing slowly with one finger, Jillian indicated the corner of the next booth over. A black nose poked out not very far from the ground.
This dog reminds me of the ones I trained in the circus in Mexico. It looks like a part mini poodle. I bet it's smart.
Jillian spoke low without moving her lips. She jerked her head.
I laid a piece of hot dog down. It smells it.
They watched, not moving, as the dog sniffed around, grabbing the tiny chunk of hot dog and bounded back between the booths.
I think I can get it.
Avery wasn't so sure. The dog looked starved, abused, and way too fast to catch, but she wasn't going to discourage her friend.
You've got a way with animals, that's for sure.
Miss Prissypants loved Jillian almost as much as she loved Gator. The only two humans aside from Avery that Miss Prissypants would allow to touch her unless she was in Avery's carrier. Jillian grinned, triumphant.
So, what's up with you and Gator? I saw you guys walking around together. I was kind of surprised because the last time I heard anything, you hated his dogs and didn't sound like you thought too much of him. I don't know what to do.
Avery bent the legs in on the second table.
He seems to like you. Yeah, that's weird, isn't it?
Jillian snorted.
Stop it. Although you two do look kind of odd together. He's wearing camo and has a knife strapped to his belt. You're usually gussied up to the gills with makeup and hairspray and wearing some kind of flowing hippie skirt.
Jillian tilted her head at Avery.
Today being the exception, is it an off day or have you started a new look? It's an off day. I still have these.
She wiggled her long, bright pink fingernails in the air.
Ah, yes, the Dolly Parton nails.
Avery grinned and looked down.
Yeah, because nothing else on me looks like Dolly Parton. True, there's no boobs to speak of, but you do have the blonde hair. Yeah, well, boobs or no boobs, Gator and I don't exactly look like people who would get together. Not that it matters because he's leaving going west and I'm going to D.C. So, what's the problem?
Avery brushed her shirt off and looked down, stalling.
I'm afraid if we spend more time together, it's going to hurt when he leaves.
Jillian paused as she held the one wreath that didn't sell.
Of course it's going to hurt when he leaves. That's life. But the less I know and like him, the less it will hurt.
Avery grabbed a box for the wreath from beneath the booth.
You can't live your life avoiding anything that's going to cause you pain.
Jillian stopped abruptly and put a finger up. The dog was back. Avery took the wreath while Jillian took a hunk of hot dog out of her pocket and tossed it so the dog would have to come a little closer than the last time to get it. They waited silently. Finally, after sniffing and crouching and sneaking forward, it lunged, grabbed the treat, and ran off.
But I guess I understand being cautious, especially since you've been hurt before,
Jillian said after a moment, continuing their earlier conversation.
Still, don't let fear keep you from experiencing something wonderful.
Avery wasn't convinced.
Even if it's just a week or two?
Jillian's head jerked down in a quick nod.
I think it's worth it.
Avery considered that. She also considered that Jillian hadn't shown any interest in any men since coming to Pennsylvania in the fall. But that could be because the whole town thought she was crazy with her contortions and different manner of acting and speaking that she'd developed in the circus atmosphere.
You're probably right. Maybe I should relax a little and move out of my comfort zone.
She stacked the closed box on top of the others.
But I'm not going to get dolly boobs.
Dolly boobs? Gator took the table out of her hands. Is this something you're discussing with people, or is the decision already made?
Avery's face heated, but she said, It's made, as in not happening.
Gator smirked. I think that's a good decision. Avery thought maybe the tips of his ears were red. Maybe. Where do the tables go? He asked.
They belong in the courthouse basement.
Jillian pointed to the large building across the street. Gator hefted the tables. Anything else need to go? I can handle a little more. They gave him the poles for the booth and a bag with the coverings.
Mrs. Baker should be there showing everyone where to set things,
Avery said. Okay, I'll be back. Jillian left to look for her dog, and Avery walked over to the old oak at the edge of the big expanse of grass, out of the lights, but she was still able to see while she waited for Gator. Other folks were finishing packing their things up. Some had left their booths up to take down the next day, so the place looked partially finished. Jillian was probably right. It wouldn't hurt anything to enjoy the next few days. Make some memories. The only thing that might happen was that things could get a little awkward between her and Mrs. Franks. Maybe she could say something to Gator to try to keep that from happening. Deep thoughts? Gator's voice rumbled beside her.
I was just thinking I want to enjoy being with you tonight.
He put a hand on her neck, behind her hair. That's funny. I don't have to make an effort to have fun when I'm with you. It's been a great day for me. Thanks. His rough skin on the sensitive part of her neck sent shivers down her spine. Definitely the right decision was to spend some time with him. She tried to focus so she could speak.
I've had a wonderful time, too. You know that's not what I meant. I have a tendency to overthink things. I don't want to do that with you.
I was thinking. He moved closer, slowly, as though giving her the chance to get away. But getting away wasn't even on her radar. She wanted to be closer.
Dangerous,
she murmured, and he laughed. I'm trying to be serious here, but his face still held the grin. She focused on the dimple at the corner of his mouth. A man as big as he was should look out of place with a cute dimple. But it fit him perfectly. Before she realized what she was doing, her finger had come up and touched it, tracing the dip in his skin, feeling the roughness of his stubble. If you're trying to get me to stop thinking, that was brilliant.
He closed his eyes. His breath fanned out, warm over her face. He pressed lightly into her finger. A heady sense of power surged through Avery. The feeling that this man, so much bigger and stronger than she, would close his eyes and sigh at her touch. That she had control. The heady feeling warred with humbleness. She didn't want to get hurt, but instinctively, she knew that by being here with her, allowing her to be close to him, he was giving her the power to hurt him as well. She had no desire to damage or weaken the man in front of her. On the contrary, with the power he'd handed her, she became aware of a feeling of great protectiveness and a desire to help him. If she wasn't careful, those feelings could swirl and mix, and it would no longer be about her and what she wanted, but about them and what they could do together. The idea frightened her.
"That's not a good look,"
Gator said softly from above her. His eyes were open again. "I'm scared." Typically, it wasn't easy to admit weakness, but the words were out before she thought about them. His fingers moved on her neck.
"Of me?"
Her lips tilted up. "No, of course not."
"Good, because that scared me."
"That I might be afraid of you?"
"Yeah, I'm just saying we're not close enough right now, and if you were afraid of me, that would have meant that I couldn't do this." He slid his other hand around her back and pulled her body to his, pressing her against him. "And man, I've wanted this all day." Her arms went around his waist, and she lay her head on his chest. She couldn't remember anyone ever saying they wanted to hold her, let alone saying it with the longing and emotion that had been in Gator's voice. His heart beat strong and fast against her cheek. His masculine scent filled her senses. His strong arms cocooned her and made her feel safe and cared for. She didn't ever want to move. "We should go find a spot to watch the fireworks."
She didn't care about the fireworks. Not the town's fireworks, anyway. He didn't move to release her, and she didn't pull away, enjoying instead the novelty of holding and being held. Finally, Gator's voice floated softly above her. "I know you're leaving, and so am I. I can't ask you to give up anything for me, and my job isn't transferable." His chest lifted and fell in a big way under her cheek. "I guess I'm saying I know there's no future for us, but I'd like to spend time with you for the next 2 weeks anyway." "Yes," Avery whispered against his chest, with no hesitation. He moved back and lowered his head, looking into her eyes. She had trouble keeping them open. His lips almost brushed hers as he asked, "Yes, there's no future, or yes, you want to spend some time with me?" She remembered what she thought earlier about hurting him. She didn't want to get hurt because men always left. He was even admitting he was going to leave. But for the first time in her life, she was more concerned about the pain he might feel. People and relationships might not be her area of expertise, but she knew Gator wasn't the kind of guy who shared his life and feelings easily. This type of arrangement could hurt him as much as her. More, maybe. His hard, hot body felt wonderful and safe under her arms.
Snuggling in close to him was like being home, and his thumb softly stroking at the nape of her neck sent delicious zaps of tingles all through her body, with warmth pooling at the bottom of her stomach. She wanted to move her own hands, explore the width of his back and the breadth of his shoulders. If she looked up and stood on tiptoe, she could kiss the hard angle of his rough jaw and taste the column of his throat. But for what? A momentary pleasure that would only turn into acute pain when he left, and, to be fair, when she left too. She pulled away and stepped back.
Yes, to both. Yes, I would like to spend time with you, but unfortunately that's not possible since, yes, there's no future.
She stuck her chin out, but pulled her bottom lip in, chewing on it. Spiegel im Spiegel played softly, sadly in her head, even as the faint strains of happier Christmas music drifted in the background. He nodded his head. His throat tightened several times. I can see how you might think the pleasure isn't worth the pain.
Actually, for the first time in my life, I think it might be. It was the thought that something I might do could hurt you that made me decide it wasn't worth it.
She expected him to smile, maybe even laugh that she was concerned about hurting him, as big as he was next to her. But he didn't. He sighed and his lips flattened. That's part of what I find so attractive in you. It doesn't surprise me that you'd put me ahead of yourself. You did it with my mother, and Fink and Ellie. Heck, it's the reason you were at the dunking booth this morning. I guess it was selfish of me to want you for only a little while.
No, I'm the one that has spent my life being selfish. Always concerned about a little hurt or about being uncomfortable or about getting ahead. Whatever. It's always been about me. I spend time with your mom because I like her. I was at the dunking booth because it benefits me to advertise for the farm. This decision, the decision to walk away from you right now, is the first decision I've made in my life solely to benefit someone else.
Her throat was dry, but she tried to swallow anyway. Her eyes stung.
Thanks for a really great day.
It was the best day she could ever remember having. This decision to walk away from Gator, for Gator, showed how much she cared about him. But it didn't matter. He hadn't moved, hadn't reached for her, had only watched as she struggled and spoke. Already there was pain in his eyes, in the tightness of his face, in the clench of his fist. How much worse would it be for both of them after 2 more weeks of wonderful days like today? A muscle worked in his jaw and his eyelids dropped a little. To me, the pain is worth every second. He spoke low, and her heart trembled along with the tympanic vibrations in his voice. Maybe that was his way of begging her to stay, to reconsider. Maybe she should.
Gator, I've been looking everywhere for you.
Kristen, dressed in a cute fur-lined vest and khaki pants, strode up to them looking slim and graceful. Even her hiking boots looked feminine next to Gator's much larger, chunkier footwear. She was the perfect foil for Gator, and they would be in the same quadrant of the country. They liked the same things, and they already had a shared history. Plus, Kristen had things Avery would never have. She looked one more time at the thin, willowy shape that somehow made her rugged, outdoorsy clothes look tough, yet feminine. Avery would look as out of place in those clothes as an elephant in a tutu. But those trappings defined Gator's life. Even if she were to give up her teaching position in Washington and go west with Gator, she would never fit in or belong. Avery moved to turn, planning to walk away. "Don't go," Gator begged softly. "Please, stay with me." Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.